Just they're COVID tested and everything. So. Yeah, am I right here? Yeah. Good. We're going to start in a minute or so. So everyone, very welcome. Waiting for the artist. If I pass it, yes, we are on time. We're going to start. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Fernando Sánchez-Migallón Cano, and the Learning and Engagement Curator here at the Douglas Hyde Gallery. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Georgina Jackson, our director, cannot be here today, so I'll be standing in for her this evening. So, before we start, I would like to thank the Arts Council of Ireland, Trinity College Dublin, and our supporters and friends for their ongoing support, which help us make these projects, special projects, possible, by supporting artists to create new and challenging work and bringing that work to old and new audiences as well. I also like to thank the Douglas Hyde Gallery team, our kind of fantastic gallery assistants, some of them you see around here this evening. I would like to thank my colleague, our gallery manager, Rachel McIntyre, but I would like to particularly thank Georgina Jackson, which is our director, but was also the curator of the exhibition From Here to There that we're going to be discussing this evening. We are beyond delighted to have you here this evening. This is our first public event with an in-person audience in nearly 2 years. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. I would like to also welcome those of you watching from home by our YouTube channel, where we're live streaming this conversation. So thank you very much for joining us online as well. And moving forward, the Douglas Hyde Gallery is hoping to adopt a hybrid model with online and in-person presentations for the majority of our public events. The aim or the idea behind that is just to try to kind of reach out as many people as possible. So wherever you are, thank you very much for joining us this evening. So, a bit of housekeeping before we start. The conversation should last around 45 minutes, giving us some time at the end for questions. For those of you watching online, you also have an option to share your comments or questions by using the live chat box in the YouTube channel as well. So that's all the housekeeping and welcomes and thank you. So let's start the conversation. So. I first like to say that we are delighted to present this artist talk in the context of our current exhibition From Here to There. For those of you who hadn't had the opportunity to see the exhibition or be here at the gallery, you have only till Saturday, so it's 2 days to go, tomorrow and Saturday. So make sure you make it here because it's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant show. And I'm not biased one bit, but it's a brilliant show. From Here to There presents the work of 3 artists, David Lunney, Áine McBride, and Watchorn. And before I start to ask them all the questions, I would like to create a bit of context by introducing each of the artists individually and also talk about a bit about the development of the project. So for this part, I'm going to be reading my notes, so bear with me. I want to make sure that I don't forget anything and I say the right galleries at the right days as well. So it's going to be reading my notes. And we're going to go in alphabetical order. We're just going to start with David's. David works across sculpture, photography, painting, and drawing. His art processes involve bringing portable sculptural frames in which his phone is inset to locations such as the Dublin Mountains. He captures photographs through these frames filtered by layers of decoration at disruption. Then digitally captured images are then rendered anew through watercolor and coloring pencil and set in frames richly decorated with wool and ribbons. You can see some of the works just there. David graduated from the National College of Art and Design in 2010. Recent solo exhibitions include Gallery Elgin in Tynset, Norway, Fins Twice, multiple times at Mark Gallery here in Dublin, and Chrome Dreams at Palace Projects, also here in Dublin. Both of those exhibitions were in 2019. Glinkry Interventions is another exhibition that took place at the Lab Gallery in Dublin in 2015. David has received Arts Council awards, including a Bursary Award in 2020 and a Project Award with Jane Fogarty in 2012. He has completed residencies in Norway in 2018, Switzerland 2016, and the RHA Black Church Print Studio Graduate Award residency in 2014. So that's David for the moment. I'm going to move on to Áine. Áine McBride's sculptural and photographic work take a close look at familiar, often overlooked aspects of our surroundings, particularly urban and domestic built environments. Functional materials such as concrete, steel, tiles, and plywood are separated from their purpose, and public spaces become private, even personal. McBride's complex works question consensus of place, of space, in thinking and acting, and implying to us that things could be otherwise. Áine graduated from the National College of Art and Design, Dublin in 2016. They were one of the artists selected for the Platform Commission's programs for the 39th EVA International in Limerick in 2020. Recent two-person and solo exhibitions include Point of Fault at Modern Tank Station Dublin and Canny at 10 End Brussels, Set at Modern Tank Station London, and Habitat HQ, site-specific projects here in Trinity College Arts Building that took place in 2017. McBride is the recipient of the Arts Council of Ireland's new Next Generation Award in 2017, Visual Arts Bursary Award in 2019 and 2020, and has been selected for residencies at FLAC, Ghent in Belgium in 2019, and Fire Station Artist Studios in Dublin 2018-2022. Last but not least is Katie. Katie's Watchorn's practice is rooted in the rhythms of rural Ireland, particularly in relation to agriculture. Primarily working in sculpture, she employs fickle agriculture-specific materials such as aggregates, fats, and plastics in combination with familiar vessels like trailers and buckets. At times, her references are abstracted and remade using alternative materials, plastic feeders cast into clay, animal feed cast into sugar, and river rosettes fashioned from leather, creating a dialogue around ideas of permanence and decay. Katie also graduated from the National College of Art in Dublin in 2014. Recent solo exhibitions include Zero Grazing at the Studio Pavilion at House Front Art Lover as part of the Glasgow International in 2021. A Calf Remembered, Wexford Art Centre, Ballyhome at Visual Carlo, supported through the Arts Council Ireland, both in 2019. She was the overall winner in the Visual Arts category in the 2014 Iris and the Graduates Awards and received the Horton Recent Graduate Award 2016, selected by the director of IMA, Annie Fletcher. And Katie has been also the recipient of numerous Arts Council bursaries, including the Next Generation Award in 2019, which supports emerging artists of promise at a pivotal stage in their career. She was a resident in the Irish Museum of Modern Art in 2019 as part of their 1000 program and is currently an artist in residence also at the Fire Stations Artist Studios in Dublin. So that's a bit of background about the three different artists, just to create a bit of context for the conversation. But also like to kind of present a bit of context about the project itself, because I think it's a very unique project in many ways. So I'm going to read this part as well, because it's on notes that I was kind of taking from Georgina. So I would like to kind of make sure that I honor the ideas behind that. So from here to there, project began in 2020, and like many other projects during COVID, took more time than originally planned. During periods of closure, the curator of the exhibition, Georgina Jackson, began to think about the function of the gallery space without an audience, and also the possibility of it as a studio space rather than just a presentation space. Georgina has also been following the work of David, Áine, and Katie for an extensive period of time, and she was interested in how each of them will take on the invitation to work at the gallery over this extended time, without a defined moment of exhibition, art, or presentation. The artistic process of creative process took place over 6 weeks here at the gallery space, where the artist was given the opportunity to access the space at any time, day and night, 24 hours access to the gallery, which was a studio at the time. And not just the project is unique in that sense, but also the way that the exhibition, the presentation of the artworks have changed over time. Particularly, you see here the gallery, Katie's and Áine's work have changed throughout the exhibition, also challenging that idea of what an exhibition is or what an exhibition space is. So that's a bit of context. I hope you get a sense of the conversations that we're going to have. And before I start to talk to the artists, I would like to go back about my introduction, each of you, of your introductions, and think about your own individual practices. So I'll just touch a bit more or expand a bit more in what I said. And in alphabetical order, again, I'm going to start with David. So David, I'm going to read these questions. Your work creates, as you have described, a feast of detail, where one's eye have no place to rest, layered to a point of abstraction, nearly, and almost the real elements and the abstraction kind of collide in some of the work. So my question is, for you, what is your interest in this construction of that idea of the layering?
Yeah, well, I suppose everything that I'm working on, I'm just consistently trying to not have the eye have anywhere to rest within the piece. So for me, I'm also trying to have where when the viewer approaches the work, they don't really know how it's made initially, but then in figuring that out, they kind of engage with the process and then kind of get to understand some of the ideas that are behind that as well. So these works you can see on the wall, for example, they would normally, this marker on the floor actually shows where this sculpture normally is. So this sculpture would use all sorts of different materials to kind of create a panoply of detail that I can then, when represented through drawing, kind of does go a middle way between realism or representational work and abstraction. And at the same time, as I'll discuss probably later on, it kind of uses the Dublin Mountains as this nexus of imagery that can just be projected through my camera phone, through the sculpture, and onto the drawn surface. I work as a picture framer as well. That's the day job. So I use a lot of the techniques that I have kind of honed, using, just for commercial picture framing. I kind of use them in my own artistic fashion as well. So that kind of allows me to do all these quite precise things with string and different moldings. And as you can see, there's lots of different picture frame fittings and everything, within the work. So that's also another kind of working concern.
I just remember when we were preparing the Learning and Engagement program for this exhibition, one of our first conversations, our first coffee, and talking about your work, the layers of making, all the kind of the contrast, the collision of the real and the abstract, but also layers of scenes, creating a very visually rich kind of objects in so many ways. So that's just layers of, call it layers of scene and layers of making as well. So that was kind of our first conversation. Thank you, David. Now, Áine, you're next. I'm also going to read this question. Sorry about that. In your work, you gather, categorize, and combine materials. You create, recreate, and resignify that which surrounds us, conjuring meaning in such a unique way. And I'm fascinated by your own book, the way that you express and the other semiotics that you are creating. But I suppose the question is, what attracts you to sculpture as a medium for this kind of semiotic or kind of signifying expression? What attracts you to sculpture to create this particular?
I think stuff, primarily. I suppose material that we're surrounded by that allows for like contemplation to circulate around. I suppose there's a relationship to the body that it allows for, and there's a scale that I'm attracted to, and an accruement. So that's generally, yeah, how I ended up making sculpture. It was the thing that I was attracted to in other artists before. I studied it myself. I primarily studied as an engineer before I went into art, and I think maybe that relationship to design and the kind of abstraction or the distance at which I was at that time to direct involvement with material maybe led me to sculpture. And yeah, the scale of it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. This is I mean, again, referring to the kind of early process of the project, like seeing you gathering materials and then how eventually they become something else. It was kind of very interesting just to see how the process of gathering and then how they kind of move and are selected, and some of them are highlighted in a different way than others, which is kind of crucial, and becoming sculptures of moments of sculpture as well.
I suppose like for this specific staging of work here, I worked maybe backwards from the invitation to work here in a studio setting. And ultimately, I suppose what I have here is like a formal manifestation of what happens in a studio. I think we all approached maybe the invitation in different ways, and I brought material from my own studio here, but there was like a predetermination about making works in those 6 weeks and then staging them that I was maybe interested in opting out of or leaning into another way of working that I hadn't really had an opportunity to do before. So there was a capacity here to stage something that was porous, that refuted maybe individual autonomous artworks, but that the artwork is a single accruement of elements that could be shifted around and was like an itemized list that things could be opted in and opted out. And that the interesting thing that was happening was that I suppose there was like a relationality between them all that was being articulated, and when I started pulling certain things out, suddenly the status or the agency of certain artworks would falter, and I would then have to move them, and there was this knock-on effect between all these materials. Yeah.
We probably will talk about a bit later about when we talk about the process of that. Now, a bit about your own practice, Katie. I'm going to read this question as well. So your sculptural work often mobilizes a scale suited to animals, displacing our human-centric kind of point of view. So this is very evident in the works here at the gallery, and in these acts of translation, there is politics at play, in questioning the accepted order of things, animal versus the human, rural versus the urban, and the present cycles that exist within those kind of relationships. So the question is, what interests you about these choices of, thinking about the scale and the way that the work is presented and that kind of relationships then create by thinking about that point of view?
I think whilst a lot of the forms or objects that I'm using are quite unfamiliar to a lot of people, for me they're also only familiar in a fairly vague sense, in terms of I grew up on a farm and spent time on a farm where there was a kind of more of an attitude or a shunning of any kind of buying in of these sort of agriculturally innovative objects, and more of a attempt to hand make or invent, or a sort of attitude of I could make this myself, which I suppose is where the initial interest always sort of lies for me. And then it's also about a scale which you only encounter when you are in an agricultural environment or in a farming place. A scale which is usually more geared towards animals, and I guess I'm interested in how does a human on their kind of vertical posture operate around an object which is designed more for the horizontal posture of a cow, perhaps, and how might it be lifted or moved around or treated, and I guess there's an interest for me in their oddness when they're not being used. They become these very strange objects. They have I suppose a close relationship really in terms of a domestic sense, mostly to furniture would be in terms of scale and size, but they are, when they're outside of use, in some way like outdoor furniture. And they're ubiquitous, but they become invisible when they're not being used, and particularly when they're not being surrounded by animals. They become these very strange objects, and maybe an abjectness comes back into them. They're thought about more in terms of how the animal might perceive it, which is a much lower point of view and a ground level point of view in relation to the mouse for exploring these objects instead of our hands. And maybe when they're brought into a gallery setting, there's maybe a blurring of distinctions between rural and urban, or between exterior and interior, which has always interested me.
Yeah, again, I'm referring back to the kind of early stage of the project, the studio projects, and seeing your space with all these kind of photographs of visual reference of those kind of objects that were kind of placed in the landscape, but they were almost invisible. Then you have to kind of look into that as well. So it's just kind of very interesting just to see those references as well. I suppose we can go back a bit, and it's going to be the same question for the three of you now. And I think probably interesting, we'll be talking about the uniqueness of these projects, and maybe go back about talking about the development of the project. And as I said at the beginning, this project was unique in the sense that it was challenging the gallery space in many ways. One of them transforming a space for presentation only into a studio space, and also challenges that idea of what an exhibition is, how something which is often of a particular moment and ephemeral, how that can be kind of changed or transformed or challenged in so many ways. So I suppose it's kind of three questions for each of you, and it's the same. So I suppose it's just to talk, the questions are, can you each talk about the experience of working here at the gallery, in this particular way, having 24 hours access to it, being able to come in and out, challenging that idea of what we often think about an artist working on the studio, creating the artwork at the studio, and then bring it here at the gallery. So challenging that kind of format that we are so accustomed of. So what is working here at the gallery, which way? By being here at the gallery, creating the work. The second question is, did your interest in the space change over time, over those 6 weeks? And the kind of question is, what did you learn out of this process? So 3 questions.
Well, I mean, working here was absolutely amazing. Actually, pretty much where I'm sitting right now was where most of these drawings were done. And like as a studio, it was unreal. You'd be surprised how quickly you just get used to 5-meter ceilings and like kind of being efficient above. I just sat here with my back facing this wall and just, slowly just built up this body of work. Like when I came in initially, I just thought I have to just start doing something, or else I'll kind of maybe freeze or just get a bit, creatively blocked. So yeah, I just started making sculptures immediately, and I mean, with the support of the gallery staff and everything, like I wasn't wanting for anything. Rachel Bote, who I don't think is here today, but she brought me and my sculpture across, for example, to the Book of Kells experience, and had like great crack taking photos and talking to security guards and all sorts of stuff like that. Engaging with Trinity was kind of an interesting one for me because my dad worked here, both of my brother and sister studied here, and I went to Montessori here. So it's always been somewhere I've been very aware of it, and I have these sort of nostalgic memories of being here as a kid. So engaging with Trinity and just getting my time as a Trinity fella was good and very enjoyable. I really got very used to this being the studio quite quickly, and I turn up with my coffee and say hi to Fernando and whoever else was here and come down and just put in a solid long day each day, which was just really gratifying. As I was mentioning earlier, I have a job as well and also have a kid, so this was like I don't think I've ever had that much regular studio time since graduating 10 years ago, so I made a lot of work, which was great. Yeah.
And did that relationship with the space, being here all the time, change your perception of the space?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I kind of feel now like I'm walking into, when you walk into your home or a studio or somewhere you've spent a lot of time, like maybe a classroom or whatever, I have that feeling about the space now. Whereas I suppose before, I mean, like probably most people in the Irish art scene or, young artists, you'd come in here and this would be like somewhere wouldn't even really have thought that it would happen that you'd show here, let alone have a studio here. So and I just have many memories of hanging around down there in the well there, waiting for wine to come out of the gate, as I'm sure other people have as well. And just being like coming to great shows here over the years, it's I feel totally more familiar and relaxed here. It's really nice.
Same question for you, Áine. Do you want me to go through? I suppose can you talk about your experience of working at the gallery? You touched it briefly earlier. In this way, did your interest in the space change over time, and what did you learn from the experience?
I think that if David was on the day shift, that I was on the night shift, or me and Katie were kind of often coming in at 5 or 6. And maybe like the question that circulated a lot in my head over the 6 weeks was really like, what is a studio, essentially? And like this idea that how it's related to labor, I suppose. You can do labor and make work here, but that's one aspect of a studio, and there's other aspects that are like privacy, or having like a space that's contained where you have a different relationship to material that you have outside of the studio, where you like, maybe in a similar way that you're talking of materials used in like a farm, or that you utilize material in a different way, or like stand on chairs to look at work and lie on the floor and you just behave in a way knowing that you're not really observed, which was different here. And that was interesting to think about, that what's the extent to which this can be a studio, or can it approximate one, or like generally if I move into a studio, I'm slow to like settle into it before I am comfortable in it, so I might bring a lot of tools and material and then just sit and read for quite a long time until I kind of figure out the way in which I want to move around in it. And yeah, there was an interesting aspect, I suppose, about the studio and labor that came up with the studio being accessible to the public, and like, how do you not fetishize labor, or how is it, you know, where you're working in a way that's honest, I mean, to your process. And I generally am better a thinker at night, you know, so I did come in later and I mean, it's an office space as well. It was multi-use, which was interesting. So I'm not sure. Well, like I became quite comfortable here, yeah, over the period of time. But my rhythm or my how I was producing work wasn't necessarily like steady. A lot of it happened at the end, you know. It's like, yeah, where
sometimes how it happens, and as you see, like it's something that you should touch there, like because during the 6 weeks we opened the studio, the space to the public Saturday, and that idea of having an audience and people to come into the space, and almost that idea of the studio become performative in a way, and how you kind of, it's a different kind of, you know, how you presenting, how you tidy up your studio, because, you know, people are going to come in and see it on Saturday morning. So it's very interesting, that kind of process as well, and how challenging that might be as well. When I was thinking about you around the studio space as well, I was thinking about the way that you gather and collect stuff, and how some of, for example, the lights in Gallery 2 are the lights that have been used on the arts building as well, and just that kind of, I suppose the studio wasn't just the gallery, probably the playground was Trinity overall as well. Yeah,
hugely. And I mean, that was the work here, it came about because I was coming in and out. Like these two light fittings that are in Gallery 2 are the light fittings that are used in their 1980s spec for the arts block. That's the part of the building that we would go in and out, use the bathroom. And I'd admired and asked, hey, is there any chance that there's any spare of these around, in which there was, you know? So, and this coat stand is one I borrowed from the office. So there was these things that because I was coming in and out, I was borrowing or asking or...
And kudos to the curators, Georgina and Rachel, both for kind of managing to get the light. It was kind of a great kind of collaboration moment as well. Thank you, Áine. Katie, for you, the questions are, can the experience of working at the gallery in this way, so talk about it. So did your interest in the space change over time, and what did you learn from the process?
I think similar to Áine, it might have looked in terms of what I was doing here over the 6 weeks, or it might have been quite hard to decipher what I was doing over the 6 weeks, which is because of splitting a studio practice in some way. Once I had decided well, I suppose when I arrived in first, there was maybe a struggle also with wondering what is my studio practice, or how does it usually operate. And I suppose there's always been an element of travel involved in making work for me. There's always been an element of something happening over here and then something happening over there, because it's kind of hard and impossible in Ireland to do everything in the one place, especially if you're working with a lot of different processes, which I didn't really think I did, but I think I learned while I was in here. I use a lot of equipment and a lot of different processes. So that was kind of the beginning, and then there was figuring out, well, what exactly do I want to do? And when I realized there was going to be quite a lot of metal work involved in what I was going to be doing, then it became about timetabling. What do I do in Douglas Hyde, and what do I do in the workshop in Fire Station? And how do I spend the 6 weeks here? How do I make use of this time here in the space? And I suppose it became a kind of mulling over space, and a space to... Because when you're doing a site responsive work, like the two works that are on the wall, there's no time for mulling over, I guess. It's you're making decisions quite quickly. You're learning very quickly as well, and it's exciting, but there isn't really that mulling over time. So the workshop was the decision making and the making production, and then here was quite a lot of mulling and trial and error, where I would bring what I thought was going to work every evening over here at 5 o'clock, and we'd meet David on his way home, and we'd be starting our evening's work.
It's because for context as well, there were certain things, there were some limitations to have this studio space. You can cut wood, you have all the kind of certain elements of equipment, but in your case, using casting quite it was kind of impossible
Hot
to have
processes,
all that.
were.
And do you think that split, I suppose, of the kind of making process versus the kind of creative thinking process, you benefit from that, or was it a challenge, or was something that?
It is a bit of both, I suppose, because I only realised really while I was here that I do it quite a lot. It happens quite a lot to me, even if I don't plan it. It seems to happen quite a lot. So it's familiar in a way, and it's an intense way to work. But as I say, like highly productive and a highly productive space to be in. But it was incredible to be in here at night time. And to be able, I think the works I made I wouldn't have been able to conceive of the works I did make in a normal exhibition run-up. That being in here allowed for a kind of embeddedness to happen in the space, I think for all of us in some way. If you had made all the works prior to coming in and then just simply came in and placed them, it wouldn't have came about in the same way.
Yeah, and that's quite apparent, particularly with your work, with the way that all weekdays kind of embraces the space in the very specific kind of way as well. So that's brilliant. We're going to probably change the theme a bit because I'm just coming to this, talking about materials. I mean, you touched upon it briefly already. But talking from my own experience as learning and engagement curator and talking to visitors and art students, and something that everyone that seems to call everyone's attention is the use of materials, of the different materials for everyday objects as quality wrappers for your piece, coffee mugs, then you use Onya, and for more or less traditional objects for you, like the beef fat as well. So, and I suppose what people have asked me when I was giving tours and talking to people is all the questions about what using these particular materials means, what kind of, context creates, and what semantic connotations are in there, and how they relate in general to contemporary art today, which materials seems to be taking kind of, a center on the conversations about context and semantics as well. So I suppose we kind of spend the next bit talking about how each of you use materials. Again, David, you're first. And as a kind of said, each of you, but you in particular, when creating your sculptures, you often use found objects or discarded materials, as mentioned, the quality wrappers, to include the piece that you show in there. So, but with that kind of use of materials, there's also an interesting play with the hierarchies of value. So like a simple wrapper, how it becomes something else. So how do you select those materials, and what draws you to them? So what calls your attention to kind of make that selection and kind of change that hierarchy as well? So that's, yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to making these sculptures, I kind of always, I'm always in my life just on the lookout for the next thing that'll create some odd optical effect or look interesting in a certain context or within the sculpture itself. So what Fernando was referring to there, these are quality street wrappers that are sandwiched between two sheets of glass. But alongside there's also little vanity mirrors, drawings, ribbons. This is hot glue that has a glitter kind of infused into it. So all of these things are kind of put together into this matrix that I realized, like, in this form, it's kind of, in some sense gaudy or kind of kitsch. But what I find interesting about that is that when I bring this where it's in a natural setting, so obviously then that's a little bit more austere. There's more kind of cooler tones, more warmer, kind of like it's kind of removed from that sort of that kitsch by being in the Dublin Mountains, which is kind of a dreary place, even though it's beautiful. So I find that when I bring this there, I use this to take photographs. When I do a drawing of that photograph, in some way, all of those materials, by being depicted through pencil or watercolor or whatever, it kind of elevates them. Like this whole idea of the hierarchy of materials. I mean, I think when I see like that kind of colorful rainbow section that is in each one of them in the top right, how that's depicted in kind of washy watercolor, and that to me has just totally. It's very funny to think that when I was eating that sweet initially, I didn't think, oh, this will somehow like be a view into the Dublin Mountains in this like little lyrical, semi-abstracted piece of impressionism. So I find that really interesting, that like the odd thing that you pick up somehow like will have this extra life, I suppose.
I mean, I suppose then to that layer of hierarchy, I don't know if you mind me saying, because you also, when you were talking to someone here, you mentioned that you were using the wrapping paper from your baby's presents as well. So that kind of has a personal origin as well.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, like this, it's kind of quite clear in the drawings. It's not so clear to look at maybe from here, but there's like gift bags that I had a baby a year and a bit ago. So when I got a lot of gifts, and a lot of them had sparkly paper on the packages. So that was just at about the time when I was just harvesting materials for this upcoming residency. So a lot of that stuff kind of went into the making of the sculptures. But I mean, another way that is born out is I never really know what to call the sculptures initially when I'm working on them, and a name just kind of often like comes to mind just as it's happening. But I was looking at the imagery that was coming out of the sculpture, and I was thinking, that's like a diamond in the sky. So then I was like, my brain is just obviously in baby mode or whatever. So that's why it got called Twinkler, because it was twinkle, twinkle, little star. So that's the kind of like, there's lots of funny little things that happen with that. So that's the little Easter egg in the name there.
Yeah, thanks for that. Áine, next to you, and to kind of ask you a question, I'm going to quote Rebecca Dwyer. And Rebecca has said that your work creates, and unquote, a space for the reassessment of couturier materials like wood, steel, concrete, and tile. They become again, just as weird as they really are, as unwieldy material solutions for particularly intangible human problems and desires, end of quote. So thinking about that, you have also taken extensive research into modernism and gender tropes. So what interests you in working with, firstly, these materials, and how this kind of relates to the exploration of modernism?
I think these materials are ones that I began working with in college and have done since. There's like a lot potentially to unpack in that, but I suppose they're the materials of construction, of large-scale construction, and they're one of DIY as well. So there's this capacity to engage with them on a variety of scales. There are a set of materials that, you can use in different volumes and cut up and make small or large, and they have a capacity to be made in relationship to the body. A lot of them are off like the urban site. And I think quite a lot about construction. I stand and look into building sites quite a lot, and I think about why I stand and look into building sites. And I think that it's something to do with like a certain moment in time that is a point of potentiality that's articulated in this urban sphere or site that we move through. And that if there's like some discomfort or dissatisfaction with material conditions, that it's a point in time at which you can like begin to imagine that thing becoming something else, or when you have some like agency for thinking about what else could be there. And this is something that I spoke a bit with Anne Tallentire, who we did this response series with an artist, and that was amazing. And when I was thinking about this again, there's the potentiality that these maybe materials draw out, but when I was thinking about looking into building sites, it's also the exposure you have to seeing how something is made, or that you see how something is constructed and what is behind what eventually becomes a facade and gets becomes very clean and becomes like almost pure silhouette and is impenetrable. So often these materials allow for the legibility of their construction. So I don't have a lot here. I maybe had more like materials brought, but as I say, I didn't work on them in a manner that I usually would, but I was thinking about where these tiles are like pallets, you know, or the loading up of things that are ready to be used in that way.
And yeah, I just think about, you know, the use kind of materials and that kind of element of presenting and staging, as you call them as well. For reference, for those of you that just talking about the response series, this a project that we run here at the gallery that we're connecting exhibiting artists with other researchers of other artists, just to try to create conversation and kind of share methodologies and research. And basically each of the artists had collaborated with a different artist on this occasion. But the point I was trying to make is that collaboration between Anne Talentars and Áine is in our websites. You can see the results, the same with Katie and Daphne Wright, and the same with David and Lilian Puzo. So you can see the results or the materialization of those conversations on our website as well. I'm just going to take the time. Okay, we have one more question for each of you, and then we're going to kind of try to kind of get time for you. If you have any questions here in our audience are online as well. So, I mean, just let me find my notes here before we move on as well. And I suppose the last theme that I would like to touch upon is that idea of space and in-betweenness. I mean, it's something that is hinted at within the exhibition's title, From Here to There, and is how each of you explore spaces, whether physical, political, or cultural, and as I said, particularly the in-betweens kind of these kind of multiple spaces. So I start with you, David, again. And as you just mentioned already before, so many of the works that you presented here at the gallery referred to places in Dublin Mountains, Sacred Hill, Curragh Wood, etc. These locations are places that you return to on a regular basis, just to kind of with your work. And you have described it yourself as this process has been almost ritual, as a ritual process. So what that attracts you to these spaces, and why these journeys? Because it's a kind of crucial part of your work. Why these journeys have to happen?
Yeah, so I grew up in a place called Ballantyre, which is just at the foot of the Dublin Mountains. So when I was a kid, I had all of Three Rock Mountain, basically just as my playground, which was really nice. And I just explored that and just ran around and took the piss probably. But yeah, so I've always had this like great nostalgia about the place, and you know, I've continued to go there for walks and campfires and all sorts of stuff. So it's a place which quite outside of art means a lot to me. But I think from my own kind of aesthetic eye that's kind of developed since being a child, like I do find that it's kind of understated beauty, and just like I just think it's kind of a beautifully dreary place. So yes, so I suppose I started bringing these sculptures up to the mountains to kind of use the sculptures as a way to kind of look at landscape in a totally different way. When you're using these sculptures to take photographs, the normal rules of photography kind of go out the window as well. It's not like you need to be looking at some Instagram-ready beautiful landscape or anything like that. I mean, sometimes it's just the way the light comes through the trees, or like some small detail gets picked out in one of the mirrors, or any other funny effect of the light or whatever. So yeah, it's always been the kind of the training ground for the sculptures, and that's kind of just how I'm making the sculpture initially with the understanding that I'll be bringing it up to the forest, and that's how I kind of come and go and tweak it and all the rest until I'm happy with it, and then the photographs then become drawings. Actually, it was quite handy here to have, well, you can't really test one of these sculptures in a white cube like this, because you can't tell what each mirror really looks like. You're just seeing either white or grey in all the different reflections. So it was handy to have this little area just out the back here where I could go out and into the Provost Garden, or on the edge of it anyway, and sort of waggle my sculpture around, and I could figure out, you know, what way it was working or whether it looked good. But yeah, so that's always kind of been the paradigm of how the work kind of develops. You know, it goes sculpture, trip to the mountains, get the photographs, you know, sort them out afterwards, figure out what I like, and then the drawings and the frames and everything kind of progress from there. But when I was here, I suppose when you look at the work, you'll see there's also, it kind of hasn't been touched on yet in this discussion, but there's kind of elements of kind of Celtic motifs that run through all of the work. I mean, being so close to the Book of Kells and having, you know, gallery assistants here who were enthusiastic to bring me and my reflective objects over to the Book of Kells experience, I couldn't say no. So this work here actually is, I brought, not this sculpture, a different one, over to the Book of Kells experience, and me and a couple of tourists were kind of standing around in the foyer where there's these big backlit panels that have like scans of the drawings that are in the book, kind of really, really big. So I was just, whatever it was about those the kind of lit panels and the sculpture and the reflective surfaces, it just came alive. So that was kind of a different one. But I think I'll be going back to just going up the Dublin Mountains. That'll be the standard going forward.
Yeah, go back to your origins as well. That's brilliant. And I suppose that idea, because some of your work sometimes stays in the mountains that you have documented, then kind of change over time as well. Just kind of like another on between space as well in there. Anya, you're next, and I suppose we kind of go back again to the materials, but the relationship to the spaces. So, for example, the work here uses multiple types of ceramic tiles that you kind of often associate with domestic spaces. So, you have talked to Georgina about how tiles are part of the urban vernacular as well. So can you talk a bit further about your interest in these objects and the relationship between the exterior and the interior worlds and how that relates to that as well?
Yep. I suppose they're another building material. They are often applied to a facade. I suppose they can be either like utilitarian, like when I was a teenager, I worked in a swimming pool and we would hose down the tiled walls, you know, and squeegee them. Or they're related to taste, you know. And all these black tiles are all the tiles that I have down there, I bought secondhand on like adverts or eBay local. And they were just small quantities that people had like done up a bathroom and had left over. So I suppose there is a relationship there to taste in the context of like domestic decor, and that I was defaulting to what was available on that secondhand market to make material choices within like some small bracket that was a black tile, so there was like a categorization of material. So I suppose the consideration of that was just like, what is certain material and how do you like define it? Yeah.
For me, this is a personal interpretation of your work, so probably maybe completely out of. But I really enjoy the way of your staging of certain objects and how made us look and kind of identify that in between, like between the gallery space and the outside, which is Trinity, which is the outdoors. For example, that kind of large window, the placement of the staging of that kind of coffee mug, kind of that idea of looking, make you look and making kind of look at that on between spaces. Yeah. So that was my own personal interpretation, but that is staging facilitating not just the materials, but the way that they are staged contributes to that. And people are being able to identify that in between by kind of looking
Yeah.
into it as well. But that's just my personal interpretation.
Yeah.
Probably too far out anyway, but it was, thanks for that. So the last question from me for the nice is for Katie. I suppose relates less to the physical space. It's more kind of, I don't know how to call it, either cultural or political space. And what I'm getting with this is like you have often spoken about your research into the dairy queens of the 19th century in France, with figures like Catherine de' Medici and Marie Antoinette playing farm, making dairy farms and producing milk in lavish marble environments as a form of female play. And I suppose what draws you to this fake kind of rurality? But I kind of frame this question within talking about the space, is that idea of the rural and the urban and how this kind of fake rurality kind of fits into it. And when we're having our conversations with Daphne, right, as well, about the kind of the way that kind of the rural is almost being kind of, is that nostalgia element to it regardless, so how that all fits into this as well, that kind of a space, yeah.
Sorry. I think I came across the Dairy Queens, or writing about the Dairy Queens in 19th century France, just after I came back to Dublin after a fairly extended period of time at home. And myself personally was maybe struggling with reconciling being back in the city, yet making work about not the city, and how to marry those two places, or having a commitment to both of them and missing one of them when I was in the other equally, you know. And I came across this book called Dairy Queens, which I think maybe it might be actually quite a widely known point that particularly Marie Antoinette anyway, that she had a faux farm in rural France that she would retire to. And I guess it became a kind of kind of a hook to hang my own thoughts on, where I feel that this sort of stylistic view of the countryside is still, whilst it was then historically aristocrats carrying that out, it still kind of happens today in a contemporary sense in some kind of urban-centric viewpoint of the countryside or rural, and historically allowed for a kind of a play at pastoral nostalgia, or a dipping of the toe into it. Mm-hmm. And I guess today, or these days, the countryside, whatever that means, is still seen as a sort of place to escape to for the city dweller, or a place to return to, and not seen as the innovative, forward-thinking, contemporary environment that it is, or the kind of chaotic, filthy, and labour-intensive environment that it also is. So I guess I felt an affinity to that when I was reading about it. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, it's just kind of a very complex kind of space, I suppose, the idea between the rural and the urban and the kind of the different connotations as well. That we'll be talking about as between ourselves and Daphne, right? So yeah, plenty to explore there as well. Now, I think we are running a bit. We have a couple of minutes, so are there any questions in the audience? Cool. I mean, just repeating this for the purpose of sound recording. The question is about then talking about the response series and each of the relationships with the different artists that they're working with. So just to span a bit on that, if that's the question, yeah. We start with you, David, and your work with Liliane.
Yeah, so Liliane Putaud did a response to my work. she came in and did 2 studio visits, and we kind of thought for quite a while about what way the response could work. I mean, certainly her artistic practice is largely kind of installation based, but what we kind of landed on was she also makes kind of digital music. So she thought it would be interesting to take some samples of sound up in the mountains, and then also I play the mandolin, kind of Irish style mandolin. So she took samples of me doing that as well, and made a crazy soundscape kind of house music piece. You need to hear it. It's kind of it's all sorts of different digital music genres, kind of in a big long 20-minute section. But she made an LP of that, which was played in the gallery every Thursday during the run of the show, and there was a listening event when it was launched, and she made a sleeve, which was kind of also kind of a graphic response to my work as well, and it turned out great. So it was really good.
And both pieces are available online as well to listen to through our SoundCloud as well. And it's interesting just to have that duality of the digital, the online version, and how everything sounds with this space as well. And kind of, it was an analog. It was like we have a record player playing every week, so it was just interesting just to see that and how they fill the space. So, and it relates a bit to David practice, having the music playing every Thursday at 6 o'clock relates a bit to David's kind of element of repetition and multiples as well. So it was, it's been great and very successful. So great collaboration. When you want to talk about your collaboration talk with and Talented.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was super fruitful. It was also very fortunate timing in that Anne had just had a solo show in the MAC in Belfast. So it really opened up this discussion initially where I was responding to Anne about Anne's work, and Anne was responding in turn to my work here. But Anne is based in London, so there was a big aspect of the dialogue was me attempting to articulate what exactly was here, which was both via images and then like a day where I came in and walked around with my camera phone, and Anne would ask, for a close-up of this, or I suppose trying to piece together the context of how the images I had sent fitted together in space. And produced a work in response, which was a A0 drawing, like an architectural plan of the building. That was one provided by the gallery of Gallery 1, and then this annexed Gallery 2, and had drawn and created a composite plan. And on that plan, in coloured marks, had drawn on where the work that I had made was situated within it. And this A0 poster was cut up into an A5 booklet. So there was a load of things that were at play in my work and in her own work that were formalized into this response that had both a visual record of what was here in actuality, and through it was written responses made by Anne in relation to the work and some text that I had sent her.
Yeah, it was interesting, kind of, because one of my favorite parts, because I mean the way that Anne designed the poster, I would call it the front side is the architectural drawing, but the back side has the text. The text is written about. A very fascinating part is Anne describing her experience of you taking her around the gallery, and that kind of idea of the distance but being here at the same time as well, and that idea of that connection but being disconnected at the same time. So there's a copy upstairs of the hard copy if you want to have a look before you go, but it's also available online. And I don't know if the poster is in the space. Yeah,
there's the poster is rolled up and is in Gallery 2 behind. So it became embedded in
It
the
became
work.
part of the exhibition
Yeah.
in a different way as well, the A2 poster as well. Thank you. Yeah. What about you, Katie and Daphne?
I concur that the response series is an incredible thing that the Douglas Hyde does. And I expressed an interest in working with Daphne Wright when it came up. I mean, I've been interested in Daphne as an artist since college, I would say. But particularly interested in another response, I guess, she curated a response to the Freud project in IMA a couple of years ago, a few years ago. And I found that amazing because Daphne has an incredible ability to pull from a really wide range of sources. She's really well read in lots of different areas that aren't necessarily visual art, and she's able to pull them together in a really interesting way, particularly in that show in IMA. And we've kind of been circling each other for a few years, where I've been trying to meet with her, and she's been maybe trying to meet with me and following me, and I've been following her. But this was when we actually were able to properly have a conversation. And conversations we did have, they were, we met, she was incredibly generous. They were maybe 6-7 times we met since October, 2-3 hours at a time. Really wide-ranging conversations, as is in her nature, I would say, where we could be talking about metaphysics and the brain, and then, literature, Irish literature, international literature, poetry, visual art, peers, our lives. It kind of just was really all-encompassing. And at the end, we were like, well, how are we going to tie this up into, something that people can see from these conversations? And I had been talking about Niamh Campbell, who is a friend, but also an incredible writer, and an academic writer and a fiction writer. And I'd been telling Daphne about Niamh and her kind of back catalogue of what she's done and how I've worked with her in the past. And Daphne was interested in meeting with Niamh, so then we had a meeting with Niamh and kind of spoke with Niamh about everything that we had talked about ourselves, and Niamh then pulled together this incredible essay, which I think reflects the conversations we had really well in terms of its highly complex and dense in places, and then opens out into personal narrative and Niamh's notes on coming to this show and seeing the works and her own responses to the work. So in a way it ended up being a response to Daphne's response to me. But our plan is that it's, which I suppose fits in with the nature of this show, where things changed in the show over the course of the last few months. Me and Daphne, Daphne and I, are planning on continuing in some way.
And that's one of the great things of the aspects of this, and in all cases, it was kind of an appetite for continuation beyond this kind of particular time and space as well. In terms of Niamh Campbell's response, again, it's available up there, and I think it's hoping to be published in different magazines as well. But I suppose I see that as Niamh as mediating your conversations and the different, and it's a very rich kind of text, but I think she kind of nailed down the conversations that you and Daphne had. So we are running out of time. I think we're over time. So there's no questions in YouTube, as far as I'm aware. I just checked a couple of minutes ago. So we're finished for the evening. So first and foremost, I would like to thank you to making the effort to be here tonight. Again, we are beyond delighted to be able to have an in-person audience here at the gallery. There are more of these to come, as I said. But I would really like to thank the artists for their generosity, for sharing their experiences and the insight on their work. So if you kind of join me with a little clap at the end, just thank you for them. So just to finish, again, the exhibition is open till Saturday, so you have 2 days, tomorrow and Saturday, to come in, just to experience the artworks, and if you have been here, just tell everyone that this will be here as well. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. See you. Bye-bye.